So this morning we begin a new sermon series in which I need you to go back to the glory days that we call high school. Do you remember those days of high school? Do you remember a song from high school that spoke about your experience and time during that era that you never want to go back and visit? Maybe that song that you played over and over again, you played on a record player because that was the technology in use at that time. Maybe you were more advanced and got to use 8 tracks that you could plug in and play that song over and over again. Maybe you were one that had those cassette tapes with the little wheel that always fell out and got tangled that you used to share your story. Or maybe you're young enough that you only know CDs that scratch way too easily. Or regardless of your generation that you represent, all of us have songs from high school that we remember fondly, that shape the tone and the culture of your day and age. Last year, when Brandon and I went away to plan sermons, he came up with a sermon series called Mixed Tapes. It shows you our generation, that we were of the generation that we would take love songs and put them on cassette tapes and give them to our girlfriends to show them how much we cared. It was cheesy then, as it is today, but nevertheless, it sounded so cool because songs have a way of speaking for us in a way that language often doesn't. And so we use songs to convey our heart's desire, our hopes and our dreams, our hurts and our sorrows. And so today we begin with the first song of the Bible, a type of song, if you will, called a lament out of the book of Lamentations. A lament is something of sorrow, of sadness. And today, because it's such a great verse, I'm not going to preach it. Good news, right? Instead, we have another David here to preach it. Reverend Dr. David Popham, if you'll come forward, and we welcome him to Central Union.
Thank you.
David just arrived on Oahu in September, and he is our new conference minister for the Hawaii Conference United Church of Christ, of which our church is a part of. He has come from the East Coast after spending many years in one of the conferences on the East Coast. Prior to that was in the Rocky Mountains, serving in conference ministry there. And he comes here to be our leader, to be the fearless one that dares to step out in faith and bring all of our 130 churches in the islands together to work for the mission of God and for this day and age. We invited him to come to speak to us and to be truthful. When we realized that we invited him to come on the Sunday of Lamentations, we immediately said to him, you can pick any passage in the Bible that you want. And to give him props, he goes, I'll take it on. And Brandon, Mary, and I all looked at each other and were like, okay. I've heard it twice now. It is awesome. It is an invitation for us to be honest about our lives and the reality therein. And so would you welcome Reverend David here as he leads us in worship.
Thank you all. It is a pleasure to be here with you this Sunday. There is a connection you all wouldn't know about, neither did I until I saw the slides ahead of time. Your Reverend Russ Kirby, am I calling the right name? Called the Salem of UCC in Denver, Colorado. The very first church I ever did search and call with was Salem UCC, Denver, Colorado. So there's a connection there. And I'll claim that for whatever it's worth. I do appreciate those who have traveled through all 3 services. You deserve a stiff drink afterwards for going into Lamentations 3 times in one morning. I noticed in your kind of bulletin printout, this is called the Journey into the Soul, this part of the service. And Lamentation reminds us that sometimes the journey into the soul is the journey to a sad place, because the soul can be a sad place. Sometimes the soul hurts, and that's that deep down gut hurt that we spend lots of money in therapy to help address. And sometimes the soul can be cut off from God. And that's a really deep down gut hurt that we come to a faith community to help us address as well. That's what the book of Lamentations is about. If you have ever been to that point where you feel like your life sets in ruins, you've been to the book of Lamentations, whether you've read these incredibly 11 verses or not. That's where you've been. It is the place of angst and utter desperation, when the picture-perfect painting of life that we all carry around with us just kind of evaporates and disappears, and what we thought was true and firm and we could hold on to just isn't there. And this is, of course, it's a place that we would never go to willingly. It is a place that forces beyond our contingent, take us to, like when I leash my dog, I would say, and drag him out for a walk. The reality is he drags me out for a walk. But you get what I'm meaning. There are times when life beats us, and we got to express that. If you have been to that place, then you know the personal experience of the cry that is wrenched out of the throat of the Israelites that opens the book of Lamentations. I say open the book. It's the entire book. Lamentations is 4 laments, and it never resolves itself. So deep is that grief. Jerusalem was once a princess among the nations, is now ruined like a widow without a husband or without children, because Babylon has pillaged her. She once ruled nations like Edom and Moab, and now she's a slave to Babylon. And the city streets once teemed with pilgrims going to the temple, but the temple has been destroyed. Such is the cry of desolation and destruction. The devastation is so complete that in these opening verses, all that remains is the rising laughter of those who take glee in her ruin. The pain is so primal, it is as if God has set the universe against Jerusalem. And it is so real that we living now have to ask the question, indeed, if God is against us, how can we stand in life? Says the commentator Gary Southern, Lamentations' raw pain leaves the preacher with many directions for proclamation, none of them pretty. Honest, yes, just not pretty. And so I get to say to you, welcome to the Not Fun Sunday. If you wanted to skip a service, this would have been it. I will say, though, welcome to the Honest Sunday, and maybe welcome to the Honest to God Sunday. Several years ago, I served a smaller congregation in rural Utah, and I still can recall the morning that those of us who always were at the church getting it opened up and ready for services, we were gathered, and here comes the accompanist, and she was still is an extremely genial personality. But on that day, she was troubled. And so we gathered around her to talk with her, to see what was the matter, and she shared with us her alcoholic husband's drinking binge from the night before and the hurtful and wounding words that he spat at her. And then she said, I'm sorry, church is not a place for such a detail. I wondered why. Why isn't the church a place where we can come and sing the blues with each other and together as a family of God stand before the throne and sing our laments when life hurts? Lamentations reminds us that God is not diminished by our pain. God does not shrink from our hurts. And God is not dismayed at the times that life created from above becomes suckish down below. Suckish, it's full of sorrow and full of pain. And we know that when we're honest. In his memoir, the African-American philosopher Cornell West repeatedly returns to the refrain that singing the blues can be cathartic in the suckish times of life. However, to sing the blues, we must be brazenly honest with ourselves, acknowledging that pain, and we must be brazenly honest with God, acknowledging that no matter how great God is, we still live in pain from time to time. Lamentations, from our perspective, is shamelessly honest to the point of being uncomfortable to read. Listen again to the agonizing words which describe the despair of Jerusalem. Desolate, bitter, pain, bondage, derision, hunted, naked, comfortless, all like nails in a coffin over and over. And they culminate in the personal voice of Jerusalem addressing God directly, saying, "Look, my Lord, and see how worthless I have become." And some of you have been there, and certainly I've been there too. Quoting the Old Testament scholar Kathleen O'Connor, lamentation names what is wrong, what is out of order in God's world, what keeps human beings from living in all their creative potential. She goes on and states, simple acts of lament expose these conditions, names them, opens them to grief and anger, and makes them visible for remedy. That's why we have to be honest. Last week at this time, I was completing the 5-day retreat in Kalapapa. I saw you all advertising the retreats coming up next winter and spring. Of course, Kalapapa is what? It's the place of exile of what folks at that time called the living death, those suffering with Hansen disease or leprosy, who were wrenched from their homes and from their families due to the stigma and ignorance of the sickness at that time. Often the message they heard from society and from the church was very simple. You are being punished by God. And yet, on the windswept peninsula, they formed communities of faith, and they anchored their existence in God. And one of them, Samuel Kawalu, gave musical expression to that pain in his own lament called Hymni o Kalapapa. And I offer a translation. I don't think it's a direct translation, but more of a translation of feelings of that lament. And it begins, the suffering of the people of Kalapapa. People look down upon us as we look up to the cliffs which separate us in this forgotten land. Too bad for us, for we are left alone on these shores. Only God listens to us and all our troubles. In singing the blues, we give voice to that complaint, that anger, and therefore we protest that which prohibits us from thriving. This is All Saints' Day, and we celebrate today not those who made it through life with no scars on their souls. Rather, we celebrate those that wrestle with the brutality that life can be on this earth and persist that God is still a part of that experience. In the other services, we concluded with the hymn, I Sing a Song to the Saints of God. David kept pointing out that one of those saints was fed to the fierce wild beast. So if you want to be a saint of God, hold on, people. It's a tough ride. To lament is to be countercultural. And if we have a lesson from the Lamentations, it is this. Our narrative in the U.S. is typically to suck it up. Don't let people see you in pain. Just muster through and keep on keeping on. Is there any wonder why the U.S. is experiencing an opioid epidemic, or that anxiety is now at a level among middle school children that we used to put people in asylums for in the 1950s? Why is it that we celebrate those who are stiff-lipped and medicated, and look down on those who wash their pain with free-flowing tears. In her book, Trauma and Recovery, Judith Lewis Herman describes how the dominant culture in the United States is that of denial and turning a blind eye to atrocity and trauma. She goes on to say, as a society, to escape the pain, we lie about that pain. We obsess over money and material things. We live vicariously through our celebrities or escape into workaholism or other addictions. We displace our anger by scapegoating immigrants or transfer our pain onto others through acts we deem as charitable and social justice. And I have to confess, that last two cuts pretty close to where I've been. Singing the blues encourages truth-telling. Raising a lament invites us to enter suffering in all of its rawness and affliction. If we are the saints of God, then we are the ones who stand with our friends, or maybe it's the truth that's within us we stand with, and proclaim that the attitudes and behaviors of others hurt us, as my church accompanist did all those Sundays ago. We speak the truth, for it must be set free, even if it invites discomfort in its wake. We speak the truth, for only with speaking the truth does the path to healing open up. I have wrestled with a way to sum up this sermon with a pretty bow. That's what I like to do. And I can't find that. I've been sorely tempted to skip off to other parts of the Bible that would bring the solace that Lamentation seeks for but never delivers, because so raw is the experience there. And I'll prove it to you. Right here you can see where I went through the original ending, and here's my written-in ending. That wasn't good enough either. So I'm going to sum it up with the only blues songs that I know, and I've been laughing with David. This song has gotten like an earworm stuck in my ear all week long. I went down to the river to wash my tears away. I went down to the river to wash my tears away. But when I got to the river, oh Lord, the river was dry that day. Here again, the insights of Kathleen O'Connor. Lamentation names what is wrong, what is out of order in God's world, and what keeps human beings from thriving in all their creative potential. Simple acts of lament expose these conditions, names them, opens them to grief and angers, and makes them visible for remedy. Thanks be to God that we can sing the blues. Amen.